Hello and welcome to the Gang Culture Podcast, a series educating you about gang culture. Whether you're listening at home, school, or on the way to work, we hope you can enjoy listening and learn something to share with others. Introducing our esteemed guest for today's podcast episode, Yasser Payne. A renowned professor at the University of Delaware and a leading street ethnographer. With a passion for shedding light on the structural violence prevalent in communities like Wilmington, Delaware, Dr. Payne brings a wealth of knowledge and first-hand experience to our conversation. As the mastermind behind the Street PAR, which stands for Participatory Action Research Initiative, Dr. Payne delves deep into the lived experiences of Wilmington's residents, uncovering the harsh realities of street life and the factors that contribute to its perpetuation. Through his groundbreaking work in street ethnography and social psychology, he challenges conventional wisdom and exposes the root causes of issues such as gun violence and gang culture. Though Dr. Payne's mission extends beyond academia, he is dedicated to teaching the streets about the devastating impact of gun violence and the systemic inequalities that plague communities. By engaging directly with those affected by these issues, he seeks to empower individuals to enact positive change in their own lives and communities. During this episode, Dr. Payne will share insights into the formation of gang culture and its profound effects on youth, drawing from his extensive research and personal interactions with community members. His goal is to raise awareness of the structural violence and exploitation that pervades our society, advocating for solutions that address the root causes of inequality and injustice. Join us as we delve into the raw realities of street life, explore the complexities of gang culture, and learn from Dr. Yasser Payne's invaluable insights into building a more just and equitable society for all.
Welcome to another episode of Gang Culture, Myths and Realities. I'm your host, Orlando Foreman, coming to you today. Today I'm blessed with having a great man here. It's my pleasure even meeting him, Dr. Yasser Payne, who focuses on structural violence and youth in gangs in Wilmington. He also he's the co-author of Murder Town, USA, which we'll talk about a little later in the podcast. So if you're out there, look the book up, Murder Town, USA. Yasser, first, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for having me. Thank all of y'all for having me. Definitely.
It's a pleasure having you here. So when you do research, specifically when it comes to street violence in Wilmington, how is it that the youth are involved in the research?
Cool. So I do something called Street Participatory Action Research, or Street PAR. I didn't create PAR. PAR was created by Kurt Lewin and Dr. Kurt Lewin in 1946, but I did create Street PAR. PAR and or Street PAR is when the researcher decides to include in the research process or in the research team members of the population being studied. I'm a street ethnographer. I have a PhD in social psychology, very interested in the social psychology, particularly of those guys that commit crime and particularly participate in gun violence. Therefore, if that's what I'm studying, then I need those persons on my research team, right next to my graduate students, getting paid the same amount, learning the same skill set. Right, so we teach the streets theory, method, analysis, and or how to study whatever issue they're interested in, but in this case, gun violence. And then in addition to it being a research experience, we also do a whole lot of activism.
Wow, that's heavy and deep. Yep. They always say nothing better than live experiences,
yes,
for
sir.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
How does the community feel about living with the gang structure? What would be your take on that?
From my argument, right, now keep in mind now, we come at street violence, street crime, street identity very differently than the average academic.
Yes.
Right? For us, street life, street culture is a site of resilience, right? And by resilience, we don't mean that it is a good thing. In fact, it is the way that men and women, boys and girls in the streets are ensuring their survivability. It is the way that they are coping with their extreme trauma. So the gang or street identity, ironically enough, actually, is a mechanism to address a lot of the needs, right? And that a lot of the youth and or a lot of the adults who are participating in the streets, right, need. Keep in mind, a lot of folk are struggling with housing, unemployment, right?
Yes.
And this has been going on for a very long time by design. Right? What does Michelle Alexander say in the new Jim Crow? At the end of the day, we are an economic outgroup. Derek Bell says the same thing in critical race theory, right? So for our economy to thrive, you need millions of people in a respective group to sit outside of the economic order. That's the only, so the wealth is extracted from the poverty.
Yes.
Right? And you cannot have one without the other. No, you can't. Right? So as a consequence, when you really begin to understand street life or street culture from that perspective, you have a community that's structurally sabotaged every generation in service of primarily white privilege, right, and or the privilege of others as well, right, and or our capitalistic order requires so many, right, to be unemployed or impoverished.
Right.
And interestingly enough, right, for us and from our perspective, right, we also think it's interesting that so many still go to sleep at night with all of this stuff going on.
Wow.
Right? Don't even know who the good people are anymore, right? What does that even mean? Right. Particularly if we can watch all of this chaos and suffering going on. So, to answer your question more directly, the gang or street culture fills that void, rightly or wrongly.
Yes.
Right? By providing, right, usually the young men, but also young women, right, by providing for their basic needs.
Yes.
Right. And so in that sense, it is a form of coping. Yes, I do understand and or we do understand some of the negative aspects of it. Right. But it's a both and, not necessarily either or.
Right. And let me backtrack on something. So I should have touched base with this earlier. Where are you from, Dr. Payne?
Originally from Harlem, New York City. Also grew up a lot of bit in Inglewood, New Jersey, which is about 10 minutes outside of Harlem.
Wow. Okay. How would you say the community feels about living with the gang structure?
Community, at the end of the day, there is a symbiotic relationship that takes place between street culture or gang life in the larger neighborhood. Keep in mind, most folk who live in poor neighborhoods are not street identified. They don't know where the big bag of drugs are. They don't know where the guns are at. They just live in the projects. That's it, right? Less than 1% of Black America is responsible for all of its crime. About 1 to 5%, depending on who you read, of an entire city's population is responsible for the gun violence. Even within the gang, right?
Yes.
A very small number of the gang members, let's say 5 out of 30, right, is like a rule of thumb, particularly in criminology. 5 out of 30 are actually violent as a form of identity. The average person in the street is not violent as a form of identity. Doesn't mean they won't partake in the violence, but It's more like situational violence, right? For the most part, they just hustling, once again, to meet their basic needs. A number of us are enamored by media or what we see on TV or the romanticized notion of America, the land of milk and honey, right? And that everyone can make it if they... None of that is true. Right? Meaning we ran the statistical models, meaning not just my research team, but multiple research teams across the country, right? At the end of the day, the poverty is required. What is our job, particularly with our street par movement? It is to bring awareness wherever we go, to shock you into your awareness that this is going on in your name. So when are we going to stand up and stop it? All of these youth, right, are struggling.
Yes.
To make it from one day to the next. And you and I, we need them to be poor or in Ferris or struggling over in the west side of West Center City, not knowing when they're going to get. We actually, for us to have that great Thanksgiving dinner or for us to have that great Christmas or for us to go on that beautiful vacation in the sun, we need millions of people living on the edge of life.
Pay attention to the mathematics being spilled by Dr. Payne out there, please.
So the gang steps in place.
Yes. How would you say gangs impact our social culture and academic professional spheres?
To be honest with you, the way I would, as soon as, one of the things that we train and one of the things that we say in our training in the street par workshops, which run for 3 months, right? We train these guys for 3 months. We do not water it down. We train them in theory, method, analysis, activism. We pay them for their training.
Right.
Right? But one of the things that we say in the trainings or the workshop is your stories to the academy alone, to the researchers alone, are a multi-billion-dollar market. Michelle Alexander also said, everybody's feeding on you.
Right.
Including me. right? I actually start with me first, right? The dynamic is inherently and or so inherently exploitive. I don't even know. I say to the guys all the time, how to even get it out of that? But
Right.
between the books, the speaking fees, the six-figure salaries that we get at the universities, right? Your story. I'm in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. I'm in there with a bunch of criminologists. All we do is study crime.
Right.
And one thing that we realize, them poor black stories, also the brown ones, the native ones too, but them poor black ones, that is a multi-billion-dollar market for us, right? And very
Wow.
few people lose any sleep at night behind any of this. Well, let's make sure this stands up, right? So when we're in these trainings, we're bringing these guys into the awareness of a whole bunch of things, but including the market
Yes.
that has been generated around their stories, right? And now it's time to figure out how to give them the skills so they can now, right, exploit their own market and stop us from coming in there, right, and exploiting them. And that's what we're seeing with a number of the projects that we have launched in and out of Wilmington.
Let's talk about some of your projects that you have going on. Would you care to share?
Sure. So we're 6 projects deep in Wilmington.
Strong.
We're based out of the Center for Structural Equity. Darrell Chambers, a.k.a. Wolfie or Wolf, or Wolfgang or Gang. He got a lot of AKAs. He's the executive director of the Center for Structural Equity. Wolfie and I really started the street part movement back in 2009, 2010. With 15 guys and a robust institutional partnership, we're probably have expanded to about 200 now, right? And the
Wow.
base is growing. 4 projects on gun violence, 2 projects on housing. The latest project is a national street park study in 4 cities: Philadelphia, Detroit, Brooklyn, and Wilmington. Wilmington's the 4th city. Right. Keep in mind, so what are we doing? It's the most aggressive study on gun violence that we know of, right? And we're hitting the streets, we're hitting the pavements, got to collect anywhere from 150 to 200 interviews / surveys of gun carriers between the ages of 14 to 24.
Yes.
Right? Not to mention, we're paying all of the street park associates $25 an hour for 20 to 30 hours of work per week.
Right.
Some of them getting $28 an hour. Right. So my point is, this is also an economic or employment opportunity as well, in addition to acquiring a strong skill set. But that's and the name of that project is called "Got the Hammer on Me." So
Got the hammer on me. What is your message to the youth in Wilmington, or anywhere for that matter, who are struggling with street violence or gang life? What would you say to them?
Pretty much everything I'm saying, and this is what I say to them, whether I'm on the university stage or whether I'm in the projects, and I'm in both spaces, whether I'm on that street corner or whether I'm on a podcast, right? You are the food. Everybody's exploiting you one way or the other. It's time to wake up. Your greatest asset is each other. That's what street par is about, right? Bringing us to, as a collective, right? Bringing us together so that we can guard and can control, right, our communities. At the end of the day, the problem, the magnitude is so wide, is so big.
Yes.
At the end of the day, if we're not talking about full, total, complete, and entire transformation of our economic system, if we're not talking about something like black reparations, a multi-trillion-dollar package, that's what we say at the end of Murder Town, USA. Oh, yeah, by the way, Wolfie or Darrell Chambers, he's on the reparations committee for Wilmington in terms of the city council for Wilmington organized a black reparations committee in which we presented some of our stuff from Murder Town, USA.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Right, it's time for us to start taking this seriously. They also need to know it's not their fault.
Right.
They've been set up. Right, and most people can go to sleep at night with all of this craziness going on. Right, those are our babies. So the people that's supposed to care so much and love so much, right, from our perspective, from Wolfie's perspective, from the team's perspective, then there should be nothing that we don't do, right, to make the point that they are our priority. Right. So everywhere we go, we advocate black reparations, multi-trillion-dollar package, and we need that yesterday. And we need it, and we need cash payments too, right, to respond to their structural needs. Betty Lou Valentine, Hard Work and Hustling, was a very famous book that she wrote in 1978. Anything less than massive social structural change is just a program.
Wow.
That's it.
You can't get any deeper than that right there. What In working with adults who are gang affiliated, have they ever talked about leaving? And if so, what were their motives or means in doing so? Because I
Leaving
know
the
that's a
streets?
trickery slope. The gang members that I've been around, I know leaving, they say once you're in a gang, you don't leave a gang.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of cases, a lot of people have to relocate. I do know that aspect.
Yeah.
They may have to relocate the whole family. May not be able to take the family, But what would you say about that?
It depends. That's relative. It depends what their role was, how deep they were involved, right? It all depends. Some guys are just rank and file at the bottom. It's not as much of an issue. Some guys, right? And so I would say it depends. And depending on your rank and your status, it may make sense to leave. Not necessarily always out of fear, right? But you were too involved and you're too close, you're too nested in. It just makes more sense if you really want to change your life to, put some space between you and the gang. I think in some respects, though, it's just it does make sense, though, if you're speaking about that kind of classic example of you can't leave the gang unless it's by death or something like that.
Right.
Sometimes that does make sense, right? Depending on how involved you were in the gang, right? In
True.
street culture. It
Right.
depends how many secrets you actually know.
The knowledge that you have, the inside information.
You can't
True.
just share that with anybody and
You're
just
right.
leave when you want to come. You can't be that porous as a group,
Right.
right? So some stuff does have to be protected to the death. But particularly, I'm from New York City, and you still kind of have that classic organized gang or street culture that still exists out there.
Right.
You have hierarchy, right? But a lot of it now is adaptive. So a lot of the leadership, if you will, they actually do a much better job at protecting the secrets at the top.
Right.
But sometimes that stuff slips out. But that's the reason why, and I'm sure you know. But that's the reason why you can't just be in a gang and leave like that. You
No
know
doubt.
too many secrets.
No doubt.
Stuff that can get people locked out.
No doubt. Wow, that's interesting. If there was any parting shots, what would you like to share with our listeners?
I say more street participatory action research. I've never seen anything light up a community faster than PAR. Keep in mind, PAR was so popular in Central and South America between the 1950s and the 1970s. It was so popular that the CIA would send folk down there to work with the governments in Central and South America to assassinate the PAR researchers.
Infiltrator. Wow.
Because they started, and I've never seen people light up faster than when they started to read their own, conduct analysis on their own phenomenon, write up their own stories. It's like a light sparks. Learning is biological, and I heard what you said earlier. So one thing I want to leave is this. I heard what you said earlier with the previous guest in terms of what's classically described as acting white theory, right? Meaning it's a study created by Signifium Fordham and John Ogbo in 1986 in a school that they did a study in Washington, D.C. And these are two black scholars who then began to say that these kids don't value learning because they associate it with acting white, right? So given the work that I do, street PAR is an educational intervention, and it's an educational intervention with the gang members,
Yes.
right? And I do it at the highest order, meaning there's nothing higher in the educational system than a research project. Right, so that's how I can get one of those guys, or someone like a Wolfie can enroll in a PhD program, even if he's been to prison, even if he, right, because he knows the skills. He has the skills.
Right.
I've always went to bad schools. I'm also formerly of the streets. I do come from one of those families, right, and have one of those past. I've always did well in school.
Okay.
Right, since kindergarten, right, and all the way up. Always been an AP, everything, right? Nobody's ever made fun of me in school.
Right.
Now, yes, there were kids in my classroom who were made fun of. They weren't being necessarily making fun of because they were doing, they weren't being made fun of because they were doing well in school. Not in my experience. We also test for and we examine acting white theory. And for the most part, that's debunked right now. That was a theory that once thrived. Right, and now the empirical evidence is in. Our black children do want to learn. All right, learning, as they say in the University of Maryland, those scholars in their urban education department, learning is biological. Who invented that lie that white kids like to learn and black kids don't? Who does that serve? Right, mind you, if that was true, that our black children don't value learning, then how could we do street PAR? How could I get the guys that did the worst in school to be some of the best students in graduate school?
Wow.
The two couldn't exist. The
Right.
two can't coexist, right? So our community is seeded with all kinds of narratives that may appear on its face to be true. That's why we got to do the research. See, when they do the research, that's what happens. But when we do the research, see, we investigate that. We say, hold on. How could it be possible that a human being doesn't value learning? We don't have any example of that except for a Black American anywhere in the world, neither, right? Where anybody says something like that, right? And so then we do the research and we actually test it along with a whole bunch of other scholars around the country. We find no evidence of it. I'll end with this. When a kid, so in ethnography, this is an ethnographic project, one of the best characteristics of a good ethnographer, right, is I know what a person says, but what do they mean? And oftentimes we're using the same language, but we do not mean the same things.
Right.
Ethnographers listen closely. When a kid says you're acting white, what does he really mean? What he doesn't mean is he doesn't value learning. Right? When I got my PhD, the hustlers told me to come to Harlem to the barbecue, bring your diploma. I did. They said, put it in the air, and all of them gave me a round of applause. The preacher told me to come to the church where everybody goes, right? Abyssinia Baptist Church, Calvin Butts. I came there. He said, stand up, right? Hundreds of people in the congregation, and everyone gave me a round of applause in Harlem. When a kid says you're acting white, what he's saying is to another child, rightly or wrongly, sometimes he's wrong, why are you assimilating? Why are you adjusting your voice like that? Why are you dressing like that to gain approval from the teacher? Why are you acting white? Right? The other thing is this, as Black folk, learning is cultural. We're coming to the school space to learn for different reasons and in different ways. If I live in the projects and I got crackheads down there on the corner, when I go to that school, I'm looking to learn and acquire skills and understanding so I can solve my problem in my immediate environment. But if you're teaching me Shakespeare, and you're teaching me all kinds of, things that have nothing to do with my environment. I'm hungry. I'm wearing the same thing 3 days in a row. Mommy and daddy struggling at home. And you asking me what? Right? And then by fourth grade, Black boys will begin to put together, this curriculum is not trying to help me solve my problems, teaching me to the test, right? Most of our teachers, 85 to 90% of them, particularly of poor Black children, are white women. Right? So they don't even know, right? No knock, right? But learning is cultural. Right? So there's a lot of cultural impasses and right? And then them Black boys are often put on all kinds of Ritalin and drugs and put in special ed and right? And nothing's wrong with them. So as a result, he's getting angry, those boys. So that's why they got to send the Yassers and the Woofies to the school, right? And I do street par in school, and I say only send me to the worst schools. That's in quotes. I only want the worst performing children in here too. That's in quotes.
Wow.
And they usually put me in 7th or 8th period or something like that. And my class is going to be the hardest class in the whole school. And by the time we're finished teaching and doing research in here, I'm going to take these children and we're going to present our data at Columbia University and places like Yale and places like Ohio State. The very same kids that you said don't want to learn or don't care or value about it. But when I show up, man, they come running. Right? Because learning is cultural. When Wolfie shows up to the school, they come running.
Right. I've seen his work.
Right? So all of these narratives you and I have to begin to disrupt. Another thing that we disrupt, I promise you I'll end here, right, is the idea that our kids are hopeless. We're the only research program in the country that's actually testing it. When Newsweek came down to the Murdertown story, if you read it, right, Abigail Jones, she says, I love your violence data, but hold on, these kids have high self-esteem. They love their families and we survey thousands, right? We're just not talking to 5 or 10 people.
Right.
We're surveying hundreds and thousands depending on the study.
Right.
But we've said for so long that these kids are helpless and hopeless and have low self-esteem and they don't care about their families and their communities. And yeah, the white folks said it, but the Black folks said it too. Right? We're seeding a failure and I'm talking about the good people, the service providers, or seeding failure into our baby's subconscious. So we have to come along, right? And what I said in Newsweek was, hey, now, they love their families, they love themselves, they love their families, they love their communities, and we have the data. And I'm talking about the crack cocaine dealer. I'm talking about the gang member. Right? And at the end of the day, whose interest does it serve by describing all of our babies as having low self-esteem or acting white or whatever the narrative of the day is? It's not serving our interest.
Right.
And when you say things like that, when we say things like that, now a punitive policy is penned to the narrative. Because if I can say you don't care about learning, then that means I can hire a bunch of SROs that's going to come up in here. I don't know about the ones in your school, but the ones in my school, they fighting the kids every day. I mean, they literally squaring up. That's the schools that I went to. And then not only, but that's also happening in Wilmington or a place like Glasgow High School. That's all over the internet. Because in their mind, these children don't value being here.
Right.
So now they're handled differently. Right? And that's the slippage. That's what begins to happen when we allow those narratives to run rampant. But that's what I would leave us with, if that's okay. But.
Well, you left us with a lot, Dr. Payne, just for the record. I've definitely learned a lot. Once again, author of Murder Town, USA. Go out and get it.
Thank you,
A
brother.
good read. And Delaware has one of the lower literacy levels in the United States, I believe. And so we have to do a lot to help our youth learn to read and be better people. And that's what we're trying to promote, being better people. Thank you.
Thank you. Man.
It's a pleasure having you. And once again, Gang Culture, Orlando. See you next week.
This has been the Gang Culture Podcast, brought to you by The Cause and produced by the youth of The Cause production crew. Produced by Scott Michaels and Dennis Finicaro. Program manager is Darby Putney Vashis. Video and audio edited by Louis Navarrete. Hosted by Orlando Foreman. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for a new episode dropping next week. Please don't forget to leave us a review wherever you're listening.